of Royce Media, coming at you guys with another video. It's a little bit of an impromptu, but kind of want to talk about the subject of my idea of what some of the problem with modern policing is, and a possible one of the possible solutions. The reason I want to talk about this is because me and my dad were talking the other day, and I'm not sure how the subject got on to the issue of policing. Actually, I do. Let me take that back. We got on the issue of talking about the problem, one of the biggest problems with modern policing, and this was due to an incident that a relative of mine was involved in, where she had a police interaction that um, ultimately it turned out positive, but she wasn't completely happy with the result because she had some medicinal cannabis confiscated from her. Now, ultimately, how the law in Illinois is set up, it was right for the police officer to confiscate marijuana from her. He was right in that particular circumstance, but um, and he could have actually did a whole lot more to her. He didn't bang her. He just ended up confiscating the cannabis because of how the manner it was being transported and stored. You know, my father was talking about how one of the biggest problems in policing is that a lot of the police officers that are employed are people who don't come from the areas that they have to work in, and they really don't come from the culture of people that they have to deal with. And to his point, he was correct. A lot of the issue with modern policing is that the majority of police staff are white males, and these white males grow up in areas that are predominantly white, and they're dealing with white people. They understand the overall culture of white America, and most of the times, because they have to deal with um, different white ethnicities, which there are. You know, Italians are not like the Irish, who are not like the Polish, who are not like the Scandinavians, who are not like the Germans, so forth and so on. You know, they all have their um, unique cultural points that you know you have to deal with. But as a white American, because whites are the majority in America, and American culture is a mishmash of different white ethnic groups. As a white person, you're more likely to come into contact with the different cultural aspects of white ethnicities. That being said, because the black population is only around between 13 and 15% in the U.S., these white American males will spend a large portion of their lives not dealing with black people outside of controlled settings. One of those controlled settings is the media. So the bulk of what they learn about black Americans comes from television, and because people watch the news, the news media so much, they get a lot of the sensationalized negative aspects of black culture and black people. So that being said, These guys are what I would liken to as a hammer. And when you are a hammer's job is to drive nails. And so to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And because of this, because um, white American males grow up mostly around other white Americans, they understand, while they understand white America, they don't always understand black America. And therefore, the little understanding that they do have, which is negative because of the media, um, they tend to look at aspects of black American culture as shaped by negative media images. Now, saying all of that, um, when they deal with black Americans um, with a limited understanding of black American culture, they don't understand some of the things black Americans do. They don't understand how the black American community is structured. I'm not going to see black American community, black American population. They don't understand some of the points of the structure, and they don't always understand how to operate within it. And lots of times, they tend to act out of the negative perceptions that they may have. This is affirmation bias. As I said before, a hammer looks at everything as a nail. A remedy to that is to have more black people in law enforcement and more black people that come from predominantly black areas that understand the various cultural markers and nuances of black American culture, and to also be open to changes depending on the area. Like in a city like Chicago, black Americans, you have black Americans which are maybe 25, I think, on the high end, to 20% on the low end, the population of the Chicago and Chicagoland area, which is the surrounding suburbs, so forth and so on, that touch Chicago. This is primarily the Cook County and the surrounding counties such as Will, DuPage, Lake, so forth and so on. In these counties, they are still predominantly white, with the Hispanic population coming in at second. To a lesser extent, then you have the black American population, then you have Asians. And with the Asians, you have different types. You have Indians who are Asians. You have Arabs who are Asians. You have a Chinese community. You have a smaller Japanese community. You have Filipinos, so forth and so on. These are all part of the greater Asian population in the Chicagoland area. Now, getting back to black Americans, we know in Chicago, the black population on the south side is very different from the black population on the west side. And though they may have relatives on one side or the other, how they move and how they perceive things is somewhat different, And if you move in between the two populations, you can see the differences. And then there are blacks on the north side of Chicago who are very different from blacks on the south side and west side. On your north side, a lot of the black Americans you have may actually be of Caribbean or African descent, and they have different cultural identities, and they have different that they perceive things. So in all three of these black American population groups in Chicago, there are differences. Some of them are significant, some of them aren't. But anyway, Black Americans in Chicago, typically older ones, a lot of times they are very aware of those differences, you know, and they know that depending on where you are, you have to move different, especially how the neighborhoods are compiled, and who the what the predominant Black American cultural group type is in those areas. Like I know with Black Americans from the South Side, a lot of them tend to have relatives in places like Mississippi and Louisiana, whereas Black Americans on the West Side, a lot of them tend to have people from places like Alabama, Tennessee, places like that. And as I said before, a lot of your Black Americans on the north side of Chicago tend to be of some type of Caribbean or African descent. With the Africans, you have a lot of Nigerians on the north side of Chicago. So, and that definitely influences that population on that side of town. Thing is for each one of those towns, well, first of all, you need to have more Black Americans in law enforcement because Black Americans understand Black Americans. It's like having women in law enforcement. I think one of the best things that ever happened was to have women in law enforcement and in positions like administrators, detectives, and so forth and so on, because women understand women, and because you have more women in law enforcement, it actually makes it better because women criminals have a harder time fooling women police officers when investigations into crime allegations occur. Whereas a lot of men tend to look at women, and this is something that white men do, they look at women as their mothers, and to them, mom is the weakest sex, mom can do no wrong, mom is a saint, especially if these are white men who were raised in the Catholic Church. That whole influence of Mary, Mother of God, it impacts a lot of how they see women. Whereas women know women, and women know when women are being sincere, women know when women are lying, women know when women are omitting information, women have a better idea of when women are telling the truth. And because they are women, sometimes you get a lot of times you get objective. Women police officers are more objective when it comes to women and investigating crimes. The same thing when dealing with Black Americans. Black police officers understand how the Black population works. They have a better idea, and they understand that depending on where those Black Americans are from, they understand the differences in the people and how they think and perceive things. Not only that, I think the advantage that Black police officers have is that because they had to grow up in the overall white culture, and they had to work with white Americans and go to school with them, and a lot of times live in neighborhoods with them, is that they have a better idea of white American culture, and they're not as quick to look at all whites in a negative perception. Black Americans are not as insulated as white Americans, because there are areas in the U.S. where white Americans, the only contact that they have with Black Americans is, again, through the media. So you have white people that can grow up their entire lives and really not meet Black Americans. So you have that going on. You know, Hispanic Americans, so forth and so on. Their communities are kind of still have to grow up and work in American society.